All right, let's jump right into this explainer. I want you to picture this scene. It's late afternoon, the sun is painting the city in that really soft golden light, a phone is buzzing, just absolutely insisting on being answered, on a kitchen counter, but its owner, a woman named Mara, well, she just lets it go. She's standing at the window, hands pressed against the cool glass, just kind of tuning into the indifferent, everyday rhythms outside. You know, a dog barking, a delivery truck pulling away, a couple laughing 3 floors down. It's a completely, beautifully ordinary moment. But then, this quiet, persistent thought just sort of interrupts her routine. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic siren or some sudden diagnoses, it just slips in and lodges right behind her ribs. And the thought is exactly this. If today were the last day of your life, would you notice anything different? I really want you to think about that for a second as we go through today's explainer, because we are going to examine exactly what happens when we finally stop living on autopilot. Mara starts wondering what she'd regret, what she would change, and honestly, whether the things currently filling up her hours are the things she'd actually want to fill her last ones. So that brings us to Section 1, auditing an ordinary life and looking at memory as a ledger.
Rather than reaching for a pen and paper, Mara just starts making a list in her head. She's evaluating her life, categorizing what truly fills her time versus what she simply allows to consume it. And there is a pretty stark contrast in this mental ledger. Under names, she remembers deep emotional connections, right? Her father's laugh out on the porch, her neighbor Clara always bringing over extra sugar, a teacher who once told her she asked really good questions. Under objects, it's absolutely not expensive things, but sentimental ones. A chipped college mug, an old photograph, even a pair of socks with holes in them that she just absolutely refuses to throw away. But then we hit habits, and this is where the reality check happens. Her habits consist of checking email first thing in the morning, constantly saying, "I'll call tomorrow," and postponing visits because, well, something else always feels more urgent.
Let's turn Mara's internal audit directly over to you for a second. What are the socks with holes that you refuse to throw away? Who are you constantly saying, "I'll call tomorrow" to? It's so incredibly easy to just postpone our lives, kind of assuming we have this endless reservoir of tomorrows to finally make that visit or have that big conversation. Moving right along to Section 2, rituals instead of rushing. This is all about the shift to intentional action. So Mara shifts from this mental audit into immediate, intentional action. And it starts really small. She brews her coffee, but instead of rushing through it just to get to the next task on her list, she does it with intention. She actually honors the ritual itself. She looks at her phone, sees the unread messages, and deliberately puts it face down. They can wait. She walks out her door with absolutely no plan, wanders into a small park across the street, and just sits near an old man feeding pigeons. And she actually listens to him talk about his life. The jobs, the cities, the regrets, the small victories, like a thriving garden. And from this spontaneous conversation, Mara grasps this fascinating concept called assemblage. She realizes this old man's life wasn't one huge cinematic arc of meaning. Life is an assemblage. It's a bunch of tiny choices, repeated over and over, stitched into a pattern that, honestly, only really makes sense when you look back at it.
This brilliantly illustrates how she applies that concept of assemblage to her own afternoon. Look at this timeline of micro-actions. Within the very first hour, she actively chooses connection by texting her neighbor Clara to get tea. By hour 2, she's calling her sister, and they're just laughing until they cry over their mom's terrible cake. Hour 3, she stops at a bookstore and finally buys this thin, yellowed book of poems she'd been admiring for months. By hour 4, she's paying for a stranger's drink at a coffee shop and having a genuine conversation with the barista about something, anything other than the weather. She is actively stepping into presence.
But look, presence isn't just about buying coffee and laughing. We move now to Section 3, tackling the hard things, and asking, what would you leave unsaid?
Around mid-afternoon, Mara has to face something she's been actively avoiding. She opens an email she had put off for years, a request from her estranged brother to talk. Her fingers are hovering over the keyboard. This is exactly where the old hurts and awkward pauses usually surface, feeling like, I don't know, cracks in plaster. But then she has a specific, powerful thought. If today were the last, what would I want to leave unsaid? And that thought right there gives her the courage to hit reply. Their conversation is super clumsy at first, but then she brings up an unexpected memory of climbing a frame in a backyard and feeling safe. The tone totally softens. Now, they don't fix years of silence in a single hour, but because she asked herself what she'd want to leave unsaid, they finally start.
Which brings us to Section 4, the big realization. Precision over panic.
As the day winds down and the light folds into evening, Mara wanders down to the river. The city lights are reflecting on the water, kind of like scattered stars gone small. And this is where we get to the core philosophical lesson of her entire day.
On one hand, we have this sharp, invasive fear that makes us hoard our time like pennies, or maybe the quiet fear that keeps us from living at all. But on the other hand, we have what Mara actually experienced, being precise with time. Being honest about her own mortality didn't make her reckless. It actually made her precise. It forced her to identify exactly what mattered.
Let's see how this builds into her interactions. Her old mindset was completely driven by productivity and that ego-driven need of always being right. But the reality of today feels something entirely different. Presence. Choosing kindness over being right, and saying I love you without needing an audience. The illusion of an endless future feeds our ego, but recognizing the absolute limits of our time fuels our empathy. Her day didn't produce grand cinematic epiphanies. Instead, it produced clarifications. She realized she would just be grateful for the small, ordinary things. A really good cup of coffee, a hand that squeezes yours when you need it, the sound of rain on an unfamiliar roof. Life is a steady and honestly often clumsy accumulation of these exact types of choices and moments.
Which leads us to our final section. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. Creating a gentle map for living.
Mara returns home, carrying her new book, still tasting the leftover warmth of someone else's coffee and feeling a significantly lighter chest. She sits down at her kitchen table, listens to the city's soft breathing through an open window, and she decides to write a note to herself. It says, "When you're tempted to wait, remember today. Say the thing, do the thing, forgive the small offenses. Your tomorrow is not guaranteed." She folds this paper up and puts it in a drawer, not as some morbid reminder of death, but as a brilliant, gentle map for intentional living. It's a literal guide for how she wants to operate from this day forward.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If today had been Mara's absolute end, it wouldn't have been a tragedy of wasted time. It would have been a quiet, full afternoon spent actually paying attention. And falling asleep that night, she felt exactly where she belonged. Improbably, that thought felt like a beginning. So I have to ask you, if today was your final full afternoon spent paying attention, would it feel like a tragedy of wasted time or a beginning? Stop waiting for the perfect time to live. Start paying attention today.